Hello and welcome to another VR2 on SI Podcast. I'm Jake Nichols, and here with me, as always, is Matt Ray. So for tonight, we've got a recruiting mailbag for you guys. As you know, we asked you to drop some questions earlier today about 3 o'clock, and we are taping this at about 8 o'clock. So we have had time for those to roll in and had time to look through a few of those questions and get to some of those this week. A big week for Tennessee. As many know, the Wade twins set to make their announcement on Friday. We'll talk about that and much more. Firstly, Matt, how you doing?
Yeah, doing good, Jake. I'm glad to be back here with you. Had a good day out at Neyland Stadium yesterday, covering the Vols as Josh Heupel was out for his first open practice. So it's good to be back, fresh, talking about some other stuff. So I'm ready to roll when you are.
Yep, and another good day, like you said, out at Neyland Stadium yesterday. A lot going on, and then at Lindsey Nelson Stadium today as well. We'll talk about that more later this week. But getting into that recruiting mailbag right off the bat, Matt, as of right now, our first question from Evan Reeves: what does Tennessee have to do, or what does Tennessee have to pick up in the transfer portal to be successful next year? And then, moreover, from that, how many can Tennessee get from the portal? And do you have thoughts on the Wade twins? So kind of a loaded question there. But firstly, let's start with what does Tennessee have to pick up in the transfer portal to start things out with the Josh Heupel era correctly?
Well, I think it's an interesting situation. Josh Heupel's been asked about it a couple of times this spring already, and now the Tennessee staff's having an opportunity to evaluate, where they need guys. I think there's a lot of hypotheticals that play into the situation. One, you have to start with quarterback play. I thought all three guys, and before I go down this road, we're at practice 8, and it's April the 11th. So I think the quarterback situation is a long way from settled. Yesterday you saw Harrison Bailey running with the 3s as the quarterbacks continue to rotate. Bailey ran with the 1s during the scrimmage. So, in the Jeremy Pruitt era, if somebody was running with the 1s during the scrimmage, that you felt like that guy was going to be the guy,
Right.
going into the next week. So, it's an interesting situation. I think Tennessee's truly viewing this as wide open and trying to see who can do what. So, at the quarterback position, I think Tennessee's filling it out. They can do a lot of different things there. But right now, depending on if Caden Salter gets back with his football team or not, and there's mixed signals out there about that, I think Tennessee's still kicking around, the option of bringing in a guy in the transfer portal. So we'll see what happens there, but that's definitely one situation that I'm monitoring. Then you also have to look at, I think linebacker. Yesterday had people ask, what does the linebacker situation look like? And, you saw Salome Page and Morven Joseph get the start there. And then behind those guys were walk-ons. So for Tennessee, you've got Jeremy Banks sideline. You've got Roman Harrison sideline. Both those guys are, going to be key contributors to get back and kind of allow you to have a two deep of scholarship linebackers. But again, you can't afford much injury there if that's all you have. And the future of Aaron Willis and Martavius French are uncertain. So I think certainly if there's somebody there coming out of spring, I think Tennessee's going to be active there if they can. And then, in the defensive backfield, you have to think that Tennessee's going to be active there. Saw, a combination of defensive backs yesterday. I thought Christian Charles really flashed with the INT, but, for his first scrimmage, the freshman was kind of all over the field at times. He's been banged up, been in the non-contact jersey, so he really, really adjusted to the speed of the game well. Was a guy that Jeremy Pruitt's staff was high and kept quiet. So, he can factor into some rotations at all the different spots. I think it's going to be hard to keep him off the field at the end of the day. But, again, out at cornerback, you look, Tennessee's kind of only got a 2 deep right there right now with Warren Burrell and Kenneth George running with a 1 yesterday, and Alontae Taylor and Tyus Fields running with 2s. And again, I don't think any depth chart at this point is set in stone, but there's certainly places Tennessee can add. And, if you look at the numbers, they could take up to 4 or 5 guys even. But will they is the question. I think there's a lot of what ifs out there for Tennessee, and what are the sanctions, and what are they going to have self-imposed. So we'll see what happens with Tennessee, but I think they could take a few guys out of the transfer portal, and probably will. I think some people kind of be surprised to hear me not talk about offensive tackle. But I think that's a position that on the surface doesn't look great right now. But I think that when you factor in that Jeremiah Crawford and Amari McNeil have not made it to campus yet, and R.J. Perry and William Griffin Parker are working their way in. Cade Mays can kick out. I think that position's fine. So I wouldn't expect Tennessee to take somebody there unless they just, it was a guy that they felt like they absolutely had to have, that they couldn't miss. And, that guy could end up there post spring, but we'll see. But for now, I think for Tennessee that it's really kind of maybe a quarterback, depending on how things shake out with Caden Salter, and then maybe a linebacker or two or a defensive back or two, whatever's best available. And then, coming back to the last part of that question from Evan, with the Wade twins, yeah, there's been a lot to unfold with those guys. It was not too long back that they released their top schools and they were different. And, Tennessee wasn't even on one of the lists. And now Tennessee's in the Final Four, and really down to the Final Two. It appears they're deciding between Kentucky and Tennessee. I think Virginia's still, optimistic. They've done pretty well with some of those mid-state guys that the Wade twins are friends with, especially Fisher Anderson, who has locked in an official visit there. So, I would consider them the dark horse at this point, but I think it comes down to Tennessee and Kentucky. And I think, credit Josh Heupel. Jeremy Pruitt's staff wasn't, as high on those guys, didn't spend as much time there. Josh Heupel has, but, Jake, you saw this firsthand. Destin Wade plays quarterback at Summit.
Yep.
He led them to a 14-1 state championship last year. He quarterbacks for one of the best 7-on-7 teams in the state, the Dream Team. Destin Wade believes he can be a quarterback. And, he's open to helping his team in any way at the college level. But, Kentucky is definitely making the pitch for him to be a quarterback. And, I think that's a factor. Kentucky's been in the recruitment longer than Tennessee. Not just with Josh Heupel's staff, obviously, but for Jeremy Pruitt's staff. So it's not that far from home. So, there's a lot of factors playing in there. And I think this one's going to be really close to call coming down the stretch. And, we're going to work it the next week and see where things go. But, the Wade twins have really done, their due diligence in getting out and trying to see these schools on their own. And they're going to make a decision somewhere on Friday to play ball together. And, it's going to be interesting to see, because I think, like I say, I think both schools feel good about where they are, and rightfully so. But Tennessee's continuing to recruit them really hard. Josh Heupel's National Siblings Day post, that was not by coincidence.
Right. And I agree. Talking to them at that 7-on-7 in Gatlinburg, they talked up the Vols some that day, and what they like about the Tennessee program, and just possibly being a part of being that turnaround in the Heupel era. And Matt, that really has been the pitch, just because of the way Tennessee has done things in the past few years. That's been the pitch, whether it's Jeremy Pruitt, whether it's Josh Heupel, or even before that, dating back to really when Philip Fulmer was fired, is being a part of, the group that turns that around. And, you have to think that at some point too, that pitch can only go so far, that they want to be part of a group that's kind of already rolling too, not just necessarily part of a turnaround. But like you said, I think that Tennessee and Kentucky do have a tight race coming down the stretch, but it will be interesting to see if Tennessee can gear more towards Destin in regards to that quarterback position, or get him to warm up anymore to playing anywhere else, because he is a quarterback, or does want to be at the next level, and Kentucky has like we've talked about, told him that they want him to be that person. So it should be interesting coming down on Friday. So going on to the next question from Joey Lynn at Orange You Glad. Now that's a great username. When is the earliest that we can find out anything about the NCAA sanctions? And then he asked something about the chances of the Wade twins as well. So we already addressed the Wade twins. So going forward, what is the earliest on the NCAA sanctions, do you think, Matt?
I'm not sure there's a timeline right now. I think Tennessee, I mean, it obviously got started late. It seems like it's been 3 years. I mean, when you think about it, but it's really, started unfolding, not that long ago. And, from what I've gathered and talking to some people that I trust, Tennessee, the NCAA has still been, asking guys questions and trying to, get answers that they're seeking in this process. And, I don't know if there's a timeline. The NCAA doesn't get in a hurry with anything. If you look back to the Cade Mays situation last fall, he didn't end up getting the final answer that he could play until week 2 and had to ultimately miss the South Carolina game. So, that's one of the things that's impacting Tennessee, negatively on the recruiting trail. You have teams that are saying some stuff, just throwing stuff out off the wall. That Tennessee's basically going to get the death penalty. 3 years, massive scholarship reductions, and I don't think that is the case. I think Tennessee handled things the right way. I think Tennessee did a lot of things correctly. They made sweeping changes. I mean, when you look at it, a lot of the people that were involved were fired, without pay, fired for cause. So, you look around and there's not a lot of new people, or there's not a lot of old people from that previous staff up there. So I think, that Tennessee's going to come out better than most people think in this situation. I just think right now that there's not a timeline in place. And I think the timeline, and I think that's hurting Tennessee on the recruiting trail. In fact, I know it is. And, the faster they get an answer, the better. But, I don't know when that's going to come down, if anytime soon, because like I say, they're still, trying to tie up loose ends at this point. So it's going to be interesting to see when things, completely come down and when the NCAA is able to get Tennessee an answer on what they're facing moving forward.
Right. And now I know we already discussed the Wade twins, as I mentioned, but Matt, just to kind of put a number on it for Joey, what would you say the chances are right now of landing Keaton and Destin on Friday?
Yeah. So again, I mean, that's tough to say, but I would, again, I think it's as good as a 50-50 chance. And I know that has taken the easy road out, but I mean, honestly, I think it's as good as a coin flip. Both of these schools have made unique pitches to them, and I'm not going to say the process has overwhelmed them, but the process got really fast, for those guys. And I think that, a couple of weeks ago, I think Tennessee was surging, but I'm not ready to rule Kentucky out at this stage. I've talked to some people that feel like they've been, in it and shouldn't have been ruled out at all. So, one big thing in recruiting is tracking the visits, and the Wade twins got up there this weekend. Is that going to impact a lot? I don't know, because it's a self-guided tour, but you're still able to talk on the phone with coaches. You're still able to go see hot spots. So yeah, I mean, I really do think right now on Sunday, as we're recording this at 8:45, I think it's as good as a coin flip with the Wade twins.
Now, going into a little bit more on recruiting, not just the Wade twins, but overall, Tennessee has a huge crop of 2022 talent in state right now. Josh Heupel has talked about locking down those borders. He mentioned that as a point of emphasis in his introductory press conference. But so far, that has not gone according to plan. Heupel has struck out and missed on several in-state prospects so far. So the question from Aaron Springer now, Matt, is how many of the top 20 in-state players does Tennessee still have a decent shot at landing? He set the over-under at 10. Would you take the over-under on that? Or would you take the over or under on that from 10? And then just how many do you think that Tennessee has a shot at? Because, as I mentioned, Heupel has already struck out on several.
Yeah, so right now I'm going to take the under on that, and I'm going to use the 247 sports composite rankings, to kind of to give my answer here. 'Cause that's a ranking system that uses everything, uses ESP, and it's an algorithm type ranking system. So I'm going to use that to kind of try to be fair on each front. And obviously it starts with Walter Nolan, who left Tennessee off of his top eight. I spent a pretty good amount of time with Walter breaking down that top eight, prior to his release for our national site. And I wouldn't rule Tennessee out there. You can't count Rodney Garner out, but Nolan is at the same time. Yeah, he's an in-state kid. He's in Cordova right now, but is he really an in-state kid?
Right.
He was originally at Olive Branch in Mississippi. Then he
Right.
went to IMG. Then he came back to St. Benedict at Auburndale. And IMG has continued to want to get him back down there. We'll see what happens on that front, but that's a tough one to put on Tennessee in terms of calling him an in-state kid. But obviously, right now they're out on him. Ty Simpson's next on the list. He's committed to Alabama. Jordan James is committed to Georgia. It's hard to see either one of those guys flipping back at this stage of the game. Next, you have two guys that I think are very attainable for Tennessee and Keaton Wade and Fisher Anderson. I think Tennessee's done a great job there. I think, obviously I've shared enough about the Wade twins at this point, but, I think Tennessee's got as good a chance as any school in that recruitment to land both of those guys right now. I talked to Fisher Anderson last week. He took a self-guided, tour of 4 schools in the ACC during his spring break. He went to Virginia Tech, Duke, and North Carolina. Academics are very big for him, but I think Tennessee has continued to work and slowly chip away there and are a pretty good factor in that recruitment now. And credit Glenn Ellerby. He is aware of how much the academic side means to Fisher Anderson, and he's selling him on how that academic side can translate over to the football field in
Right.
Tennessee's offense. That's something that's appealing to Fisher right now. Next, you've got Sam Roush, who's a tight end that's committed to Stanford. Tennessee's not been, really involved there. Dallin Hayden, obviously Tennessee's been involved there. They're not, I don't think they're the leader in that recruitment at this stage of the game. But, they're going to battle, and I think they're going to be in it until the end just out of respect for the fact that he's a legacy prospect. But when you're battling Ohio State, Notre Dame, and then obviously Illinois has creeped into that recruitment because of his brother being there and that family's relationship with Brad Bielema. So, that's a tough recruitment to call, especially right now as he wants to get out and start taking some visits. Moving down to Isaiah Horton, Tennessee's continued to stay in the picture there. They've battled there. Florida's done a really good job. It seems like that's where the battle is right now, with Alabama hanging out there too. But is he a take at Alabama at this time? I don't know. I think it's Florida and Tennessee battling right now, and Miami also a factor. One of the 4th team in that Final Four. I think he'll take a look at all those teams officially, at some point, even if he makes an early decision. So anything could happen there. Taylor Groves just decommitted from Michigan. I think things are wide open for him, but I haven't heard a whole lot about the Vols being involved at this point. Barryon Brown, an athlete out of Pearl Cone. Historically, Tennessee's done well at Pearl Cone. They've landed William Parker, have landed Elijah Simmons out of there. Barryon is a guy that would really fit into this Tennessee offense. But again, another battle. Alabama battling. It doesn't look like he's in too big of a hurry to go anywhere, anytime soon, as he just released his top 10. So, pretty hard to call anything there. Cody Jones is number 11 on the list, and he is committed to Michigan and seems pretty well locked in. I spent some time with him at Under Armour Atlanta, and the Vols are coming hard at him. They're selling him on the ability to play either side of the ball, so he likes that. But he looks pretty polished as a defensive back, and that's something that Tennessee can really use in this class. So they're going to continue to work to try to flip him. And then Caden Martin is obviously committed to Miami for baseball, and is going to walk on the football team. Destin Wade is next. We've talked about him. Had a recent update on Cam Miller. The Vols are in a really good spot there. Alabama remains a factor. Florida still communicating. Mississippi State. Miller is really close with Dallin Hayden. So Illinois has become involved there. So, I don't think Cam's anywhere close to a decision at this point, but the relationship that he's built with Josh Heupel has the Vols in a really good spot. And, I think if he was picking today, that would be one that could go Tennessee's way. But, unfortunately, most guys aren't picking and signing on April the 11th. So still work to be done there. Jacob Hood is next. Talked with him. Dale talked with him earlier last week, and the Vols aren't as active there. Auburn's active, Georgia's active, some other schools are active, but Tennessee hasn't been as active there. So right now, I wouldn't push him anyway. Tennessee has really turned up the heat on Miles Pollard, another in-state DB that they need. That's a pretty big battle right now with Auburn coming in hard, Penn State coming in hard of late, Oklahoma staying in the mix, Washington and Michigan also involved. So that's another one that could go any way at really any time. Anthony Brown is a guy that has kept things pretty quiet, but Tennessee has communicated it with him from time to time. So that's a guy we'll see if Tennessee chooses to push for. Then his close friend Jalen Lewis, they play on the same 7-on-7 team together. The Vols haven't been quite as involved there, and we'll see again if they get involved. And then Langston Patterson, the inside linebacker from CPA in Nashville, he's committed to Vanderbilt. And Tevin Carter is the 20th player on the list. And the Memphis Signal Caller is now down to 2 schools in Memphis and Texas A&M. As Tennessee did, have an active line of communication with Carter for a little bit, but the Vols have turned their attention squarely to Taven Jackson, and that's the top quarterback target on the board for them right now. Outside of that top 20 are some guys that I do feel like Tennessee is involved with, and some guys that are quality guys. Caden Pope, Patrick Kudus, is Dallin Hayden's teammate at Christian Brothers. Pope is at Hardin County, cousin to Latrell Bumpus. So I think Tennessee's done a really good job with both of those guys. Several schools recruiting both of those guys. So we'll see what happens there. But, I think the Vols are in a good position there. And then, Giovanni Davis is sitting outside of that top 20 ranking, a defensive tackle from South Pittsburgh. Tennessee's continued to be, persistent there. And he just doesn't look like he's in a hurry to make a decision. DeArco Perkins McAllister, who's vastly underrated, in my opinion, is outside the top 20 there. And, the Vols have battled for him and have recruited him as hard as anybody. And then Elijah Herring, who I'll have an update coming out with later in the week, could be nearing a decision, and is a guy that Tennessee has pushed for of late and seemed to be neck and neck with Michigan coming down the stretch. So, again, just out of that top 20 list, it's pretty easy to pick the under, in my opinion, given the fact that several guys are already committed. So we'll see what Tennessee's able to do, but right now I'd go under that. And I know that was a lengthy answer, but, it was a good question, I feel like.
Right. Now, going forward, I'm going to try to address a few more of these. Matt, looking at this defense, we got a chance to watch a little bit of that yesterday. As mentioned, we're taping this on Sunday night around 8:00, and got to see some of that defense yesterday in that open practice, the most we've gotten to see, really. And I think we both agreed that the running game and just the offensive line overall really dominated against kind of a weak-looking Tennessee defense. And, they really were, I think, undermanned on the defensive line. Tyler Barron was sidelined during part of that. And then, as you mentioned, Tennessee could be looking to get a couple more names in the transfer portal at linebacker and at defensive back, and a couple key positions there. So going forward, what is the profile when you have everything you need for guys being recruited on Josh Heupel's defense, and what Tim Banks and he would look for?
Yeah, obviously, I think the answer is versatility, and I think that's the way that the college football game is played in general now. I don't think anybody's position specific right now anymore. At least, you got guys that, and it feels to me like Tennessee's going to run a 4-2-5. That's what I felt like. We kind of saw the most of yesterday. With the linebackers being able to move out, come in, kind of do what they want. You've got guys like Morvin Joseph, but in general, I think, if you're Tennessee, you're looking for versatility. When you start them on the defensive line right now, you've got, a couple of 300-pounders on the inside, but, you've got Tyler Bear and Byron Young on the outside. I think ideally, if you're Rodney Garner, and we've seen it from him in years past when he's using a four-man front, you want 300-pounders that can play in. And that's not to knock Tyler Bear or Byron Young. Both those guys are going to be impact guys for Tennessee, I feel like. But, I think you want bigger guys, maybe 290, 300-pound guys that can play defensive end. Greg Emerson comes to mind for me. I think he's going to end up being a good fit for Tennessee if he can get back on track. Hit a slump last year. Can he break out of it this year? But, up front, you want guys that can, I think, play all of the positions. And when you look at Tennessee, they were recruiting Walter Nolan in that aspect. They're recruiting some other guys in that aspect. Quintel Jones out of Peach County who can kind of play anywhere. Bishop Thomas, another guy out of Orlando who can kind of play anywhere. So you're not hearing a whole lot of Tennessee recruiting just, specific techniques. They are recruiting Vincent Sneed as a 5-tech, but, he's got the frame to add considerable weight and be able to move inside or outside. Then moving back to linebackers, obviously I think in any system you want guys that are 3-down linebackers, and it felt like that's what Tennessee lacked last year. With Henry To'oTo'o, he just was not a 3-down linebacker, struggled defending the pass, and that was a big part of Tennessee defending the slant a lot of times.
Right.
I think Morvin Joseph has all of the physical tools. He has the length, the speed, the lateral quickness to be that. So I think when you look at a linebacker in this system, I think you look at Morvin Joseph as kind of the profile for what Tennessee would like. And then, in the defensive backfield, I think William Martinez has touched on it. It's what the defensive, role has turned to. A guy I think of is a guy that Tennessee and Jeremy Pruitt got really close to landing last year in Nyland Green. I mean, he was ready to commit to the Vols in late October, early November. Ended up at Georgia, but you're talking about a guy that's 6'2" and can run down the field as a cover corner, but can come back, roam at free safety, and then work over top of a quick slot at the star position. So you want a guy that can play all of those positions. Obviously, that's ideal. But, I think that if you're Tennessee, you're just looking for versatility everywhere. That's what you have to have, especially in these first couple of recruiting classes. You're probably not going to be able to get your ideal guy. So you have to get guys that can, contribute in different ways. And you're going to have to win by committee. And I think for Tennessee, that really comes down to versatility.
And Matt, I think I want to follow up with that as well, not necessarily with the question from Henry there, but what do you think is going to be the biggest difference in development on defense from Jeremy Pruitt's staff to Josh Heupel's and with Tim Banks running everything over there? What do you think is kind of the difference in just the way that these guys are going to be taught to play on the defensive side of the football?
Yeah, I think for Tennessee, I think, Jeremy Pruitt had, some guys that that have developed talent. But you had a Brian Niedermeyer who was an excellent recruiter, but when you kind of look at the positions he coached, they never got better. They never really
Right.
progressed. So, you see a Brian, a Brian Jean Marie who has developed talent. Mike Eckler who's been all over and is going to be hands on with everybody on the team. And from a special team standpoint, and he's obviously going to coach up the outside linebackers. He's going to have a chance to coach everybody. So, Rodney Garner, I think everybody's saying, oh, what can he do, with guys that aren't elite? And yeah, that's a fair point. But at the same time, Rodney Garner has developed some really good talent. Almost everybody that Rodney Garner's touched in terms of getting out on the field and playing for him have, made an impact for the teams that he's been coaching and had a chance to get to the league. So, just across the board, I think these guys are a little bit, more known for their ability to develop talent than what Jeremy Pruitt had, because these guys haven't always had, that elite talent that some of the guys on Jeremy Pruitt's staff had. Jeremy Pruitt came from Alabama. Derek Ansley, obviously spent time in Alabama. Same thing with Brian Niedermeyer. I thought, for the bad rep that Tracy Rocker got, I thought Tracy Rocker on the defensive side of the football developed talent better than any position coach on that side that Jeremy Pruitt had during his tenure. Rocker's defensive line was dominant in that 6-game stretch, coming down 2019 there. When the Vols made that run to get bowl eligible, Alabama couldn't block those guys. So,
Right.
I thought Tracy Rocker, was from a developmental standpoint, was as good as anybody that Jeremy Pruitt had. So again, I think, Tennessee's got some guys that have developed and have had to develop. And, I think they're going to be more accustomed to the challenges that it presents. So, we'll see, but I think across the board that, it's going to be learning to play the game fast, learning to play, because you're not always going to see that same high tempo that you see in practice. But, we'll see what happens for Tennessee there. But I think Tim Banks is, has a good core group around him to develop talent well.
Right. Now, going forward, going to flip over to the opposite side of the ball. We've been talking defense a little bit. Now switching back to the offensive side. Obviously, we've talked about the running back so far. D. Beckwith looked really good yesterday. T. Hodge had a few very nice runs. Looks like he's picking up at Tennessee, kind of where he left off at Maryville, but obviously he has had some health issues. And then did not see Jabari Small, Matt, yesterday from what I can remember of us discussing. But going into a little bit more recruiting on the offensive side, talking about Branson Robinson, a 2022 running back out of Madison, Mississippi, out of Germantown High School. How legitimate of a chance, Terry Felton asks, does Tennessee have in landing that highly rated running back prospect? And how much do you think the relationship with Jerry Mack factors into that, because we have talked about his connections to Memphis, Matt?
Yeah, for starting, I think Jerry Mack is the reason that Tennessee's in that recruitment. And, I think if you look at that top 5, I think Georgia's, in the middle of that edit. And I think Georgia's in the driver's seat at this time. In fact, Robinson has kind of came out and said that they are. He's gone on record to publicly say that they are. Clemson came in and did offer, and I think that was a big offer for him. He's kind of kept things pretty quiet, though. Recruiting's come at him pretty fast. But, I think Tennessee's in there for a reason. I think it's an uphill battle. But, the Vols are going to, be able to show him a lot. They're going to be able to show him how they can use him in this system. We're already seeing some guys flash in Josh Heupel's system. Everybody wants to talk about the pass game, but the run game that Josh Heupel used at all of his stops has been great. And, you saw Jabari Small flash. D. Beckwith looked good yesterday. T. Hodge looked good in between the tackles. Jalen Wright, I think stole the show at Thursday's scrimmage and then
Mm-hmm.
came out and popped a couple of big gainers yesterday.
Yep.
So, for me, if you're a running back, Tennessee's going to be able to, show you how they can use you, how they can get you in space and let you work at the second level. And if you're a running back, that's what you want. You want to be able to work at the second level. Nobody wants to just go 3 yards in a cloud of dust, 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and, pop one every now and then. You want to be able to get out in space, do what you do best, and work at the second level. And that's something that Tennessee's going to be able to put on film and show Robinson if he doesn't make a decision, before the season gets going. But with Georgia, you've got 3 guys that could be gone after this year, depending on how things shake out for them. And you've got a running back room that's relatively, short in terms of depth, even with Jordan James going there. And, Georgia could, have some appeal, have even more appeal at the end of the season, depending on how things shake out with their running back room. And Dale McGee's position group always delivers. The running backs always deliver for Georgia. They're going to year in and year out. They have for the better part of the decade. And that's something that's always going to keep them in it. And then Alabama, LSU, Clemson, all of those speak for themselves, I feel like. Last year you had Najee Harris at Alabama. You had Travis Etienne at Clemson. It's just who's next for those. So we'll see where Robinson goes in his recruitment. We hope to see him sometime soon. The Vols are there for a reason. There's a top 5, and there were plenty of other heavy hitters recruiting them. But Tennessee's there for a reason. Credit Jerry Mack. We'll see how far this recruitment goes and how long Tennessee can stay in it.
Right. Now, aside from recruiting and talking about the possible success of Josh Heupel's offense this year, whether you're talking about wide receivers, running backs, or how much the defense needs to improve from what we've seen, Matt, there is still that dark cloud, regardless of what people are excited about. There's still that dark cloud of the NCAA sanctions that are pending and what we don't know yet about what could be coming down the pike from Indianapolis. So to finish off, we've got one from Don Quixote. So if the Vols win 5 to 6 games in this 2021 season, Matt, I know it kind of depends on what comes forward from the NCAA, but do you think that the possible lurking sanctions could stunt the Vols' ability to close well in this cycle?
Yeah, if those sanctions are still looming at that point, I think every school out there, regardless of who it is, if Tennessee's battling a New Mexico State coming down the stretch, I think if the sanctions are still looming at that point, any school can say it's a safer bet for you to come here because
Right.
You may never get to play in a bowl game if you go to Tennessee because they're looking at a 3-year ban and you can go pro in 3 years and never play in a bowl game. So obviously I think if Tennessee handles their business on the field, I think you're going to see them land some recruits, maybe flip some recruits. Tennessee, it has its own appeal. It recruits itself in a lot of ways. And for Josh Heupel, like I said already, the sanctions are hurting Tennessee. But if those sanctions are still looming at that time, and they very well could be, because again, it's the NCAA, and you can never predict what they are going to do. And when you think they're going to do the right thing, they end up usually doing the complete opposite. So if those sanctions are still looming, then I don't think Tennessee, obviously I think it would definitely, hurt their ability to close on the 2022 recruiting cycle, because a lot of guys are going to take 4 or 5 official visits in June. And if they were to do that, they're not going to be able to have official visits if they're open later in the year. They're going to be able to take more officials. They're going to have to try to get them up for an unofficial. And at that point, it's only going to be one day. So there's a lot of, variables that work into that. It's going to be hard for Tennessee if those sanctions are still looming at that point. I completely think that that would really impact Josh Heupel's ability to finish off his first class.
Gotcha. Now, I think that is about going to wrap us up. So, like I said, we talked a little bit about the scrimmage on Saturday, and then, the open practice on Saturday. and then touched on the scrimmage from Thursday. Again, we will try to talk some Tennessee baseball and a little bit more about the Wade twins coming up later this week. But for that, that's going to do it for our recruiting mailbag tonight on the VR2 on Sports Illustrated podcast. Matt, thanks for joining me, and we hope you guys have a great night.
Thanks, Jake. Enjoyed it.